After the first Chinese spy balloon invaded U.S. airspace and was shot down, the U.S. Air Force shot down a second unidentified flying object off the coast of Alaska on February 10th. Only a day later, it shot down a third high-altitude object over Canada's Yukon Territory, and the following day, February 12th, a fourth UFO over Lake Huron was shot down on the U.S.-Canada border. Although the White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby didn't say what the UFOs were or where they came from, the public has speculated if this series of balloons traveling around the world are not from a spy power nation, don't tell me they are from an alien civilization.
Yeah, I know that there's lots of talk about UFOs and all of that. Let's let our military do their job, collect the information. I have no reason to believe this is a UFO. And I noticed that the general's wording left open the door, so I know that's gotten all kinds of excitement. But the chances are this is just a normal, run-of-the-mill thing that we in the intelligence community know how to exploit. That's what I expect to learn in the next couple of days.
On February 2nd, the Pentagon announced that a Chinese Communist Party or CCP spy balloon had appeared over the state of Montana. The CCP responded that it was an airship used for meteorological research and expressed regret that it had mistakenly entered U.S. airspace. Although the tone of this initial response was unusually measured, the subsequent political and diplomatic fallout didn't bring the balloon incident to an end as quickly as Beijing had hoped. As the situation escalates, Beijing seems to have grown indignant and retaliated with an eye for an eye response. Since last year, specifically May of last year, without having received permission from the relevant Chinese authorities, the U.S. flew several high-altitude balloons from their own locality, which proceeded to carry on their route across the whole world. And at least over 10 times they illegally flew over China, as well as the airspace of corresponding countries. The U.S. needs to make a thorough investigation of the matter and give China an explanation for this.
Thanks for clearing that up. Anytime. Makes my job easier.
Surveillance balloons over China. Are we flying any other kind of surveillance craft routinely over China?
We are not flying surveillance balloons over China. I'm not aware of any other craft that we're flying over into Chinese airspace.
Is there any U.S. surveillance aircraft over Taiwan, over the South China Sea that would fit into that?
There is no U.S. surveillance aircraft over Chinese in Chinese airspace.
Okay, even Chinese claimed airspace.
There is no U.S. surveillance aircraft in Chinese airspace.
At the same time, China also created an incident of an unidentified object in the air near the waters of Shandong province. On the evening of February 12th, according to the Marine Development Bureau of a district called Jimo in Shandong province, an unidentified flying object was spotted in a local city and was ready to be shot down. Weibo users in China posted pictures and pointed out that the flying object was shot down the night before and that the role of the flying object was being investigated. The news was then republished by several provincial official media, followed by the highest-ranking party media, People's Daily, and finally by all the media of China's political and legal authorities, creating a huge outcry. The Chinese side began claiming on February 13th that U.S. balloons had invaded Chinese airspace. Foreign Ministry spokesmen also accused that the U.S. is the world's largest surveillance country. When pressed by reporters about whether there was evidence that U.S. balloons had flown into China, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman responded with this. I've just stated our relevant stance on this issue. For your question on the evidence of the balloons flying into Chinese airspace, you should ask the U.S. side for understanding of the issue. That would be more appropriate. The U.S. needs to provide an explanation for this. This kind of diplomatic maneuvering by the CCP is like a riddle, and it's impossible to predict exactly what attitude the top brass of the CCP has towards the balloon case and where it will lead. It seems that both the Biden administration and the CCP leader Xi Jinping want the story of Balloon Gate to be quickly forgotten and moved on. It's like a black swan flying out of the US-China relationship in 2023, disrupting the plans of the two governments to improve relations. The Wall Street Journal quoted Chinese officials with knowledge of the situation as saying that on February 1st, after communicating with Washington about the discovery of a Chinese spy balloon over Montana, senior Chinese foreign ministry officials rushed to try to verify the information. Because of U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's planned visit to China at the time, as well as his meeting with Communist Party Chairman Xi Jinping, the last thing Beijing wanted was an international incident that would jeopardize the visit. Blinken's visit to China represents the highest-ranking U.S. visit to China in 5 years. On the evening of February 1st, Blinken and Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman briefed the charge d'affaires of the Chinese embassy in the U.S. on the discovery of a Chinese spy balloon in the U.S. State Department officials told the Chinese side that the Biden administration would issue a public statement. In the hours that followed, there was coordination between the Chinese Foreign Ministry and other government departments, and the statement that was finally released was signed by Xi Jinping before its announcement. The statement said the balloon was used for climate research and went off course, and China regretted the incident. The Chinese Foreign Ministry issued the statement on the morning of February 3rd, nearly 36 hours after Beijing was first informed of the incident. According to Washington Daily, the statement was unusually conciliatory by Beijing standards, but it still didn't prevent Blinken from canceling his trip to China. The report also said Chinese officials expressed they were pleased with Biden's comments on several news programs over the past week, downplaying the impact of the balloon incident on bilateral relations and arguing that the comments showed the White House didn't want to exacerbate U.S.-China tensions.
Does the balloon weaken U.S.-Chinese relations?
No. We've made it clear to China what we're going to do. They understand our position. We're not going to back off. We did the right thing. And there's not a question of weakening or strengthening. It's just the reality.
Many analysts believe Xi should have wanted to make sure everything went smoothly before Blinken's visit, and that the unexpected appearance of the spy balloon was confusing. We believe this is likely due to internal disagreements within the CCP hierarchy. However, Beijing's accusation that the U.S. balloons illegally flew over China's airspace more than a dozen times isn't going to put the matter to rest, but rather will only escalate the situation. Without a doubt, this kind of statement will draw backlash from the U.S. and cause a further loss of Beijing's international credibility. It's believed that for a long time from now, spokespersons at the Chinese Foreign Ministry press conferences will face questions from all sides because of such a statement. This unexpected balloon gate may become a watershed in the new Cold War between the world's two superpowers. Compared to the multi-layered competition in areas of espionage, economy, cyber, military, and geopolitical that's taking place almost daily between the US and China, the presence of the balloon poses a relatively low-tech, low-level security threat. But as the first balloon floated across American skies before it was shot down from South Carolina, it has revealed the fact that the idea of the CCP posing a threat to the US homeland is neither distant, theoretical, or invisible, nor is it something that will happen in the next few years, but is literally happening all around.
To me, this is new and this is brazen, what we at least saw with that first Chinese balloon. Again, I think there's still uncertainty about what those other three objects were. But hey, nations spy on each other. Balloons have been used for years to collect weather information, to do research. What's particularly brazen about what we've seen over the last week is that first balloon. It's a pretty big balloon, 200 feet, 20 stories tall, equipment underneath it that's been reported to be the size of 2 to 3 buses. That's hard not to miss. And when it's being flown directly over the American heartland and violating sovereign airspace, that's a big deal. I also wonder what the Chinese are trying to do here. Not just collect intelligence information near our sensitive military sites, but are they testing our response? Are they testing our military operational response? Are they testing our political response? In a crisis or a conflict, would they use balloons? Would they launch a barrage of balloons and force us to figure out, do we target those and expend precious munitions on those, or do we focus on the fight in the Indo-Pacific. We have to do both, but man, that's a great way to get us to expend precious munitions.
They could figure out like, okay, here's how good the Soviet defenses are, and we can incorporate that into designing new aircraft. And that's how you get something like the stealth fighter in the 80s and 90s. That came out of some of that research, right? Where they're figuring out how did the Soviet air defenses work, and we've been testing them for years, and we figured this out, and we can design a new aircraft to try to do something like that. I'm not going to speculate about what China's doing, but the history of trying to figure out what the other side's capabilities are, that's something militaries have always done throughout time.
Unusual balloons and flying objects are not only appearing in the skies over the US and Canada. Based on the recent reports of the suspected spy balloons that have appeared in their own countries, we find that communist spy balloons have appeared in the Andaman Islands in India, Sendai and Misawa air bases in Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, and the air base equipped with nuclear weapons in Montana. And it's not just within the last year that these incidents occurred, they have been happening consistently over the last few years. All of this indicates that the CCP not only uses spy balloons for surveillance activities, but that there might exist a sizable fleet of spy balloons. In addition to major Pacific countries, CCP spy balloons have also been present in Central and South America, such as Costa Rica and Colombia. According to Costa Rica's defense minister, the Chinese government has apologized to Costa Rica. Romania and Moldova have also reported the appearance of similar UFOs in their airspace. This has brought to the public's attention suddenly over the past few short days a long-standing campaign of espionage and information gathering by the CCP to expand its influence around the world.
過去に我が国領空内で確認されていた
As a result of further analysis by the government of balloon-shaped flying objects that were confirmed in our airspace in the past, it is strongly presumed that the balloons in question were unmanned reconnaissance balloons flown by China. In response, we requested through diplomatic channels that the Chinese government confirm the facts. We strongly urge China to prevent such a situation from occurring in the future and conveyed that the intrusion of our airspace by foreign unmanned reconnaissance balloons was absolutely unacceptable. The balloon incident has set back US-China relations so much that neither side is likely to make much room in their diplomatic schedules to reschedule visits over the next few months. On February 10th, the Biden administration added 6 Chinese entities to its export blacklist in connection with Beijing's suspected surveillance balloon program. The Commerce Department said the 5 companies plus an institute support China's military modernization efforts, particularly the People's Liberation Army's aerospace program, including airships and balloons. Matthew Axelrod, Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Export Enforcement, said, "Today's measures demonstrate a concerted effort to identify and deter China's use of surveillance balloons that violate the airspace of the US and more than 40 countries." Targeted companies on the entity's list face great difficulty in obtaining US technology exports. Both President Biden and former President Donald Trump have used the list to punish Chinese companies deemed to pose a threat to US national security and to stop Beijing from making military advances. According to the list published by the official US media Federal Register, the People's Liberation Army is using high-altitude balloons to conduct intelligence and reconnaissance activities. Overseas Chinese media have traced the 4 entities on the list to a mysterious scientist named Wu Jia. He appears to be at the forefront of a group of companies developing high-tech surveillance balloons in China. His team is backed by the Beijing University of Aeronautics and Astronautics. Its former party secretary has been a member of the Central Commission for Discipline and Inspection for 2 consecutive terms. The CCP military system has been reformed, and the military space and critical air projects need to appear as private companies if they want to obtain Western technology and finance in the private sector. So many members of the military have moved inside private enterprises with specific missions, appearing as businessmen and registering many companies. Behind Wu Jia is a veteran financial manipulator, Wang Dong. He is a controversial figure in the Chinese stock market and is associated with all 4 sanctioned companies by Wu Jia. The CCP's military industry, by making use of the names of civilian technology companies and allowing private equity funds to enter, is using civilian resources to develop military technology, which in effect is assisting the CCP's military expansion. This can also breed corruption. the CCP spy balloon industry is not only involved in a shady scheme of amassing wealth, but may also be involved in a power struggle. This explains why the timing of the spy balloons is so bizarre and incomprehensible. A Taiwan expert analyzed that near space is considered a new frontier by the CCP because the cost of releasing balloons will be lower than that of satellites, and the loss is easier to replace. It is also an empty window for various countries' air defense, because generally a country's air defense radar has a detection height of 30 kilometers, which is called the scanning dead spot. The CCP uses this gap to support its satellite or other military needs. If it were a democratic country, industrial development would be bound by regulations. It won't be allowed to go and casually infringe on other countries' airspace, but the same technology is different once it's in the hands of the CCP. On August 21, 2019, the Chinese media Southern Daily reported that scientist Wu Zhe pointed to a world map on his computer on August 20th and said excitedly, "This is the first time mankind has used an aerodynamically controlled blimp to fly around the world in the stratosphere at an altitude of 20,000 meters. The stratosphere refers to the atmospheric layer of about 20 kilometers to 50 kilometers, also known as near space, which is the area between the sky and space. The CCP has a detailed description of the use of near-space flying machines. In the March 2022 issue of the party's magazine Global, a military commentator published an article titled, "Near Space, a New Position for Militarization." It claimed whoever can gain advantage in near-space flying machines will also have a greater advantage in future wars. Surely, the Chinese diplomats deny all of this. The Chinese unmanned civilian airship straying into U.S. airspace was completely an accident caused by force majeure. China has repeatedly explained the circumstance to the US, but the US side abused force, overreacted, and escalated the situation, while using this as an excuse to illegally sanction Chinese companies and institutions. China firmly opposes such moves and will take countermeasures against the relevant US entities that undermine China's sovereignty and security in accordance with law, so as to firmly safeguard China's sovereignty and legitimate rights and interests. The CCP's top brass should be well aware of the stakes of the ballooning incident. In March, the CCP's 2 sessions will be held. The epidemic at home isn't over, and the economy is in turmoil. During this period, the CCP is actually very reluctant to escalate the conflict with the US. In the midst of the high level of anxiety, the Chinese diplomats started a wolf warrior tactic, which is like adding fuel to the fire. This chaotic approach suggests panic, fear, and weakness on the part of the CCP. In China, when a dynasty was about to be replaced by another, there were usually odd and unexpected visions and conflicts, which were often accompanied by a slew of missteps by the rulers. Has the fate of the Red regime come to this point?